welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I am super duper excited about what we're going to be talking about today. I wanted to say a huge welcome. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Bakola Yusuf. Everyone calls me B, and I'm the co-founder for Excellerate Black Futures. And I'm so excited about the event this month because if you have been following us, you will notice that we've not had an event for a couple of months for a few reasons. So we took August off because we were hoping you all were having holidays as well as us, just to have a little bit of a break and some relaxation for ourselves as well as the team that support us. And interestingly enough, we picked up a new corporate partner. So we are partnering with Ariba. And we'll talk a little bit about that as I go through a couple of slides. So we took some time to kind of focus and invest in that. But obviously October is here, we're back with a bang, and obviously Black History Month, which is a lot of what we'll be talking about today. So really excited to be back. We hope you've missed us. And as normal, for those of you who don't know too much about us, I tend to start off with an introduction to Excellerate Black Futures. So I will do that really quickly because I know all of you are keen to hear from our speaker today. So I will whiz through who we are. So Excellerate Black Futures kicked off in the last couple of years, although it feels like forever, but kicked off with Winnie and myself really wanting to contribute to the Black community, to diverse colleagues as well, when we think about our careers and some of the things that we've experienced and wanting to bottle that and share that with the community. And we do this based on 4 pillars. A big piece of it is around education. So all of our initiatives and our programs are very focused on equipping our colleagues and our delegates with knowledge and expertise. I'm a huge fan of inspiring confidence. A lot of the time, the make or break between 2 candidates is one is more confident than the other. And so a lot of the reasons behind our initiatives and our events is to showcase inspirational role models and allies so people can see themselves in really senior positions and aspire to that. We also focus on practical tools, and this is a pet peeve of mine. I tend to go to lots of inspirational events, but that tends to fizzle out when I don't have practical tools I can take away. So you'll notice that anyone that we bring up to showcase is always very focused on practical tools and things that you can take away. And another pillar is about giving back. Just what we try and express with anyone we come in contact with is within your sphere of influence, there's always something you can give back. So that's a huge pillar for us. So we contribute via a few propositions. So we've got a career accelerator program, which I can talk to you about, which is more about harnessing some of those skills that we talk about to help you accelerate in your career. We do scale up events, of which this is one of them, and I'll talk a little bit about that in the next slide. We're big on online engagement. So if you haven't joined our family to get our newsletters, please make sure you sign up via our website. We're on LinkedIn, we're on Instagram, and we also have bespoke partnerships. So I talked earlier about with Ariba. So we've partnered with them. We've given 550 of their colleagues access to our career accelerator program. We're also making sure it is a top to tail approach. So we're not just upskilling their colleagues. We're also running sessions with their talent acquisition team as well as their hiring managers to talk about the business case for diverse workforces, as well as, making sure we're not just upskilling people who will then get to a bottleneck, but we're also kind of selling it at the top as well. So a really great opportunity there, and we're really excited to see where that goes. That kicked off in the last couple of months. So that's us in a nutshell. Just to talk about our scale-up events, we do 2 types of scale-up events. We do educational as well as inspirational. This session is a bit of a newbie. It's a mix of inspirational and educational, and I'm sure you'll all see why. But the educational series is more where you bring a notepad and a pen, and we teach things like, how to ace an interview or the skills you need to kind of accelerate in your career. And then the inspirational piece is around, allies or role models who are killing it in their career, who we can then, ask to showcase, firstly, that yes, we do have diverse colleagues in senior positions, but secondly, to hear about the highs as well as the lows of how they got to where they are, which I think is quite key, because most of the time, especially on LinkedIn, you kind of think everyone's flying every day. but amidst all of the rise in that career, there's some pitfalls that aren't evident, that, you know, we would love to hear around how that's been navigated. So this session is a little bit of both. I've definitely got my notepad and my pen, even though there are things that Nika is a good friend of mine that we talk about all the time, but I find that with these sessions, there are always nuggets that we can take away. So I'm well prepared, and I'm also well prepared to be inspired as well. So without further ado, I will introduce Nika. I'm not going to go into too much detail because I'm going to get her to painstakingly talk through her career to date. But she's a great friend of mine, has a stellar career in HR, has been killing it as a business partner for as long as I can remember. So over to you, Nika, to just give us a brief intro, and then we can talk through your career as well.
Thank you so much for that introduction, and hi everybody. Thank you so much for joining today's session. So Nike Kazzim, I'm a senior HR business partner. I currently work at Silicon Valley Bank, which is an investment bank that is headquartered in the US, but it does have a presence in a number of offices outside of the US. In terms of my career, where it all started, so I'm going to try my best to condense as much as possible, but I started off working for Lloyds Bank back in 2006, and that was a part-time role while I was at uni at the University of Sussex. I then graduated the year of the financial crisis, 2008. It was just terrible and jobs were just drying up, but fortunately, I was able to secure an internal move. So I took on a role in London where I was working in their international banking division for about a year. And then it was at that point I realized it wasn't really for me. So I then engineered my transition into HR. And I worked in a number of HR roles after that transition. I started off as a personal assistant and then worked my way up and then reached a point where it was time to move on. And then I moved on to a much smaller company at the time where I performed more of an operational role. It was an opportunity for me to develop a different muscle. And then from there, I actually moved on to Barclays, and actually that organization I met B at 10 South Colonnade in Canary Wharf. So worked for Barclays for 5 years. I did 3 years of them in London, 2 years in New York. I then moved on to Standard Chartered, so relocated back to the UK where I was for just under 2.5 years. Continued in a senior HR business partner capacity. And then Q2 this year, around May, I think it was, I then left Standard Chartered and I moved to Silicon Valley Bank where I am today.
Brilliant. Thank you for that. And I'm going to dial back because there was one key piece where you said, I engineered my way. I'd love to kind of dig into that because that sounds like a little simple thing, but I'm sure it wasn't that simple.
Yeah, and I was very shameless as well about how I engineered it, and I make no apologies for it. So when I was working in my first graduate role, which is the role that I moved back to London to do with Lloyds, within about 6 to 8 months, I realized that sales were just not for me, but I wasn't in a position where I had many options. So I remember going on to the Lloyds Academy site, and the Academy site was a forum where, you know, you could knowledge share, understand about development opportunities and so forth. And I put out a shameless plea just saying, look, I really want to get into human resources. I don't have the relevant degree. I don't have any experience. I'm willing to learn. Will anybody help me? And this amazing lady who I'm still in touch with today called Annette Arden-Finch, she responded and said, hey, let's go for coffee. So I met up with her at one of the other London locations. And it was there that she suggested that it might be worth me taking a slightly different approach of actually getting into HR and starting off as a personal assistant, but a personal assistant to heads of HR so that I got exposure to that environment. Right. And I could, you know, see materials, get access to certain senior colleagues, and then understand for myself whether HR was in fact a career that I wanted to embark on, as opposed to just thinking initially that was something that would suit me. So that's how I started off. And then within about a year, I reached out to one of the heads of HR and said, look, I know that you're like a massive advocate when it comes to, like, you know, career development and so forth. I would really like to complete the CIPD, which for those on the call who aren't aware, it's the HR master's level professional qualification. So really wanted to do that. And she agreed to sponsor the first half. Wasn't cheap. It was like 4,500. And she was just like, yeah. And for her to do that for me as a personal assistant, that context is really important. She was willing to do that. She saw potential in me. So I completed the first part of that qualification. I then applied for a HR manager role elsewhere in Lloyd's, secured that. And then when I moved over there, they then agreed to pay for the second half of the qualification.
Right.
So I operated as a HR manager supporting, I think it was Europe. And then I took on a change manager role as well to build out another, skill set, develop another muscle. And then from there, I then moved to a company called CMC Markets, who were very small relative to Lloyd's. They hadn't actually gone public at the time. So, the role was very operational, was very hands-on. I was working there as a HR manager looking after their technologies and Southern Europe group. So that was Spain, France, and Italy. And from working in that role, I quickly sensed the type of HR role that I didn't want to do. Like, I realized that operational roles just weren't for me, but I'm glad that I realized that for myself, rather than just by scanning a job description thinking it's not really for me. And then from CMC Markets, that was a fixed term contract for just over a year. I then moved to Barclays, started off in a HR business partner role supporting operations. Then I got the opportunity to support technology group. I actually moved into B's HR business partner group, actually. So I started supporting technology. And then I remember I had a conversation with the head of HR shortly after, and I said, look, I would love to actually move to the US. There were no vacancies at the time in the US. And she was like, okay, it's good to know, like, the seed has been sown. Let's continue that conversation. And then fast forward, I guess it was like a year and a bit, an opportunity came up. I applied for it, got the role, moved to New York. And for me, I think that was such a pivotal point in my career, because I found myself in a different country, working in a different regulated environment. My boss was actually in a completely different country. She was in the UK, I was in the US. So I had to operate in a way where I sought forgiveness at times, as opposed to having to ask for permission, because by the time I was ready to hit send or something, or reach out to somebody on something, like, the UK had logged off. So I became very empowered in that role, and I really stepped up in terms of my ability to lead and just think more broadly. And I just thrived in that environment. It wasn't without its challenges, but I would say that for me, that was such a pivotal role in, like, my career, my growth journey. And then from Barclays, I then applied for a role back in London with Standard Chartered, because I realized at that point that my time in the US, it was just time to move on. There are a number of changes. My role had actually been moved from New York to further out in New Jersey, and the proposition had changed materially. And I was like, look, it's just not for me anymore. So I moved back to London, joined Standard Chartered. And then 3 months after, we were in lockdown. So that was just interesting, because I actually spent most of my time building relationships remotely. But that was a fantastic role, just in terms of, again, me being able to, like, build on the experience I had gained from Barclays. I had the opportunity to support stakeholder groups, not only in Europe, but also in the US. I was able to leverage, the experience I had from working in a US regulated environment. And at Standard Chartered, I also became heavily involved in their diversity, equity, and inclusion agenda as well, which was great. So I was part of a number of forums, got to scope out a number of initiatives. So yeah, I was there for just under 2.5 years, and then moved to Silicon Valley Bank, and really enjoying it here. It's very different. And one of the beauties, I guess, of the role that I'm in right now is that because the organization has gone through quite a bit of growth recently, I'm having the opportunity to actually shape my role, which is pretty exciting. So there wasn't an incumbent before me, like, the role was new. So I'm building, as you sometimes say, use that analogy, it's like you're building the aircraft as you're trying to fly it. So, doing a bit of that. So it's an interesting way to be operating, but it presents an opportunity for growth.
Amazing.
And another thing I'd add as well is that with this role, I'm also able to travel. So I get to go to Israel every so often as well. So I was actually out there last week. So one of my stakeholder groups with this role is the Israel office. And I also look after their marketing function and their chief operating office function.
Amazing. There's so many strands to what you just talked through. And I think it's really key just to highlight some of the things we've shared over and over in this forum. One, around boldness. I think two, about being open-minded as well. I think a lot of people think your career projection is very linear or fits in a box. But as you've heard, you know, it's like, well, you want to change career, be a PA, but to, you know, senior HR people. And I think a lot of people might balk at that, and they're still waiting for that entry level role, but that's, you know, different segues. It also shows just the importance of sponsorship as well. Like, you know, the one person who took you to coffee, other people that, you know, spoke to you when you were trying to kind of figure out where to go. And the other piece that really jumped at me was when you kind of flagged, I'd love to do an international assignment. And I think we don't do enough of that, being vocal about what we want, because sometimes, apart from just speaking it to existence, it's also managers and sponsors aren't mind readers. So if you don't vocalize what you want and you're waiting for that tap on the shoulder, you're kind of pushing out the timelines of things happening for you. So I just love that, all of that. I was scribbling, going, yeah, we said that. So I'm glad to see that visible. So you've talked a lot about, you know, your different roles. This is the question I love to ask, because I don't know if it means I'm a pessimist, but I'm always focused on the lows, because I think the highs are visible. You know, you talked about a role in New York, which I'm sure was amazing. You talked about being empowered in that role. We've talked about you've got travel opportunity in this role. So it's easy to kind of pinpoint the great aspects of your career. Talk to me about some of the not so great highlights of your career. I'd love to just hear about how you navigated that as well.
Absolutely. So there are two actually that come to mind. So the first, it's actually connected to my time in the US. So I had stepped up to perform a larger HR business partner role. It didn't come with a promotion immediately, but I was like, you know what, I'm just going to prove myself. I'm going to earn the trust and the respect and the credibility of the business stakeholders who would advocate for me. I'm going to prove to my HR team that I'm more than capable of doing the role, and, you know, right will be done by me. And I remember that it was myself and a peer who was in the UK who were in a similar situation where we both stepped up into more senior roles, but hadn't had that formalized. Promotions were put up for the two of us. Hers went through, mine didn't. And it broke my heart because I was the only one from my team who was in the US. So I didn't have anybody around me who really understood what I was doing, like what I've been working so hard towards. And I remember I got a call from my boss, and I was literally sat on an open plan section of the floor where other HR business partners who weren't part of my team were. And then I could just tell from her countenance that it wasn't good. So I'd gone, I knew what was happening, but when I just saw her face, I was like, it's not good news. And I asked her if I should step into an office, and she delivered the news. And I was just inconsolable. I was in floods of tears because I just felt like it was such an injustice. And I think when you know that you've done pretty much everything that's right, like to the script, if not even more, and there's something that you're not quite aware of as to why you've been mistreated or that there's been a lack of parity and there's nothing you can do about it, it's really tough. And I remember I literally didn't have waterproof makeup on, so I'd been crying, like sobbing. And I'm in this room where only like one section has like has glass. So I'm at this point, like my back is to the glass, so people can't quite see my face. And then I'm mindful of the fact that I've just put the phone down. I've now got to walk onto this floor where there are about 30 people who are like, you know, within such close proximity. And I don't even know what I look like. So I didn't even have my phone with me to like flip the camera and see if my makeup's run. And I had to be so brave that day. I had to walk out like nothing happened. I literally stepped out, looked to my left, looked to my right, saw that nobody had seen me. And I went straight to the bathroom, pulled myself together. And I was just like, you know what, we're just going to need to conjure up a plan as to how the next time your promotion is put forward, like everyone is in support. But that was pretty hard. That was, yeah, because I felt like I was so ready for it. And it was just such a soul destroying experience. And there was another one. There seems to be like a recurring themes with promotions. But there was another time where, again, I felt like I was ready for the promotion. It's like I had the performance rating, like my bonus was signaling that I was exceeding, you know, on expectations. You know, I was receiving positive feedback consistently. So as far as I was concerned, I was having the right conversations. I was broaching the topic of the promotion as opposed to me waiting for a manager to talk to me about my trajectories. I was like, doing all the right things. And then I learned after like the cycle in which the promotions were being reviewed and considered that mine hadn't been put up.
Right.
But that time around, I said, you know what? You can't put up a fight with this. It's so important that we recognize that a lot of what we want begins with us. It's self-love, self-care, self-worth. I knew my worth. And somebody's inability to see that, I was not going to allow that to rattle me or have me becoming so emotionally charged that I gave them ammunition to justify their decision for not putting me forward. So I just had to say thanks, but no thanks, and just keep it moving and move on in pursuit of what I knew I deserved. And I'm sure that some people are probably thinking, how dare you? But I dare me, because I believe in myself. It's me versus me, and that's how it's always been. So, you know, that was an example of where I think with some maturity, I realized that it's not everything that warrants a certain response or for you to like expend a certain amount of energy. I was just like, I can't do it. It's exhausting, but I know my worth. So I will go off in pursuit of what I know that I deserve and just leave it there.
I think that's amazing, especially those two similar events, but you had two very different reactions. And because I know you personally, I can probably talk more about this. I think in the first instance, and you've talked a little bit about maturing when it happened the second time round. In the first instance, even from hearing you talk now, I didn't hear, even though you did all the right things, probably wasn't as calculated, because the second time around you talked about performance ratings, you talked about stakeholder feedback, you had a checklist, you knew exactly what, whereas the first time round, I think you were in a box about what needed to be done, and that caught you unawares, which is probably why your response the first time round was very different to the, nope, bye Felicia, because I know what I'm capable of. And I think it's important to reflect that to our listeners, because I think it could be either, you know, sometimes we may have missed the boat, we may have not been in tune with our stakeholders enough, or may not be in tune with the game and the politics that's being played, and we think we're on point, but we're not really. But sometimes it is just, this context no longer works for me, and I know that I'm due. And I think it's important to validate that. I've spoken to people who feel they're due, but it's more a feeling or an entitlement rather than, I've done my due diligence, I've done my performance rating shows I'm outstanding, my key stakeholders are shocked that I'm not this level. They haven't done that. It's more I've done this role for X number of years and I should be. I think there's a key difference there. But when you've ticked all the boxes and you've made your case known and that's not being reciprocated, I think it's very, very easy what the next steps are. B didn't tell you to quit, by the way, but I'm just saying, at some point you have to look at the context and go, is this where I'm going to thrive? Or do I need to be, again, that word bold and see what's out there? People talk about growth is outside of your comfort zone. We need to get uncomfortable in our comfort zone to see that progression. So I love that those were the two examples, because that made my job really easy, actually.
No, I completely agree. And one other thing I would just say as well is I think with the second instance, I was aware of the fact that we need to stop giving people more power than they should have over our destiny. Humans are imperfect. And I think to place that much power or to give somebody that much control over your destiny when you're one of how many other priorities, you're putting yourself in that situation to a certain extent, and you have to accept responsibility for that. So for me, I was like, well, I always want to be in the driving seat when it comes to my career. And that's why when I felt that despite all that I had given discretionary effort and or I wasn't receiving my dues, I was like, I'm off, because I'm always driving my bus. It can't be you.
Absolutely.
You're part of my board of advisors.
Yeah.
And it's important I'm aware of that. But this is my destiny, it's my bus, and I'm always in the driving seat.
Still in control, absolutely. Okay. And just another plug, if we've got any new listeners on here today, if you listen to any of our previous sessions, Winnie actually did a killer event around managing your career and talking about, are you a passenger or a hitchhiker, or are you in the driving seat? And when we do the Career Accelerator program, we talk about being the CEO of your career. Now, the CEO has got a board, lots of people they answer to, but they drive that company. The CEO is in control. And I feel like when you take that control, and to Nika, your point, when you take that power for your career destiny, then you drive it a lot more rather than being a recipient to everyone else. So I love that. Amazing. So we're going to start to move on to some of my controversial questions, as I like to call them. So tell me, and I know because this is a lot of the conversation we have a lot of the time, when in your career did you notice the weight of being Black?
Oh, the weight of being Black. So I would say that I definitely noticed it at the point where one of my promotions was overlooked, because the reality is that there was, in my opinion, there was something that wasn't being spoken that was clearly an issue, but people couldn't articulate to me. And I read between the lines, and it didn't take a genius, in my opinion, for me to work out what it was. Because what I would sometimes find is that some of the traits and behaviors that were exhibited by others that were being praised were all of a sudden a problem when it was me. So I just said, okay, I'm going to put two and two together. And I know that my 4 is accurate, but we're not ready to have a certain conversation, but it's starting to make sense. I'm now starting to see the picture, you know, that is being painted before me. So that was one time. And I also in that moment as well, I realized a lot about privilege, because I realized I was in a position where I could stand up for myself without fear of reproach. I knew the consequence was going to be so great, and it was going to be so costly and potentially career damaging. But when I looked around the room and I saw others who had exhibited the same behaviors, I even saw how they stood up for themselves and how they presented themselves. And I'm just like, wow, the privilege. So that's one example. Another was shortly after the killing of George Floyd. And I just remember feeling as if people were looking to me to be a revolutionary and to educate people on like the situation. And I was just like in my head, I'm sorry, but if tomorrow you can wake up and decide that you're going to learn to speak French, and you will go on like Rosetta Stone, and you'll take the steps to get there, why is it me, who's already dealing with trauma and having to relive the trauma, that now needs to come and educate you and take it all the way back to basics because you won't even do the foundation work?
Yeah, I hear that. We're both the victim and the solution all wrapped up in one, right?
Agree.
That's weight. And you've made it a bit. I'm keeping track of time. I can talk forever. That's today. So I'm going to stick a pin in the George Floyd bit. I just want to ask one question before we veer away from your career and talk a little bit more about Black History Month and George Floyd and all that. If you could share your top 3 key career nuggets to our listeners, what would that be?
Okay, so no particular order. So this one is not mine, but I've actually stolen it from an American footballer called Abby Wambach. And plug, if you guys are into podcasts, please listen to Brene Brown. She's got one, I think it's Dare to Lead, because I think Abby Wambach was actually one of the guests on the podcast. So fantastic, highly recommend. So this first one is be grateful for what you have, but demand what you deserve. I think the reality is that when you identify with an underrepresented group, you are sometimes conditioned into feeling that asking for more is synonymous with a lack of gratitude, and it's far from. The two can coexist. You can be grateful for where you are in life and ask for so much more, and it's not problematic. So I would definitely say that. There are others from other groups who have no problem with asking for more money, asking for bigger roles, throwing their hat in the ring for jobs that they are not qualified for. So yeah, be grateful for what you have and demand what you deserve. Another is take up space unapologetically. Sometimes you need to, shake the floor, just be bold with how you enter a room for people to actually appreciate how much they need you and, how they had been lacking a you for so long. So yeah, take up that space unapologetically. And another I would say as well is, and this is one that I know has had people side-eyeing me and kind of give me like the how dare she kind of look, but bet on yourself every single time. Like for me, it's always been me versus me. And there have been times when I've made moves and people have questioned why I've made those moves after like a year or two, or why I thought that I was deserving of so much more. And I'm like, I'm sorry, that's for you to go and solve for between you and yourself. But I know my worth, and I know that I'm capable of so much more, and I'm going to bet on myself every single time. Like, I'm not going to put myself forward for something that I'm not qualified for. Please don't do that. Please don't do it. But I'm going to bet on myself every single time, and I'm okay being my biggest cheerleader, and I'm okay being my only cheerleader. I have no problem with it. So yeah, those three.
Amazing. And the one thing I will steal from you tonight, you said, how dare me? I dare me. I love that, because that just takes away everyone else from the equation, and it's just you. And whilst I agree, don't apply for a role you're not qualified for, but also don't wait for the role that ticks every single box before you apply. Like the many people
on the runway.
Yeah. And then I've spoken to other people who can only do 1%, and they're like, hey, hire me, and they get hired.
Yeah.
So confidence goes a long way.
But like you say, B, full chest, right? I think that's where that one.
Yeah, that's my point. Always go in with your full chest.
Yeah.
Because that room has been lacking a you. I love that as well.
Yeah.
They've been lacking a you, and there's no other you. So I absolutely love that. So thank you for that, Nike. In fact, if I hung up now, I think we've dropped enough gems for the evening. But we're going to talk about Black History Month. We all know in the UK, it's Black History Month in October. I'm just going to vent a little bit, because I have a personal gripe with Black History Month being in October, because there's always half term and 500 million events to cram into the weeks that aren't half term. So I always have a bit of a rant. But hey, you know, like I said at work the other day, I'm sure in November I'll still be Black. So I think we can still continue that conversation. But before we delve in, I'll just say to everyone who's listening, if you've got any questions, I know the chat is alive, but if you've got any questions, we're going to pause for questions about 1:45. So please, if you can pop your questions in the chat, I will make sure that we grill Niki towards the end of the session. But speaking about Black History Month, we all know it's Black History Month in the UK. And obviously, I don't think anyone can say it hasn't become more visible since George Floyd, right? And it's interesting to note that the theme this year is, I will quote it specifically, it is time for change, action, not words. Now, Niki and I have had many a conversation on this prior to today, but I'd love to hear, let's talk, we've already talked about the weight of being Black since George Floyd happened. And I think that was in multiple folds. In your experience, Niki, was, you know, people turning to you to kind of create some sort of solution to it. I think my experience was absolute silence, which was just as triggering. So we've had different experiences, but we've both experienced the weight of it. If we fast track to Black History Month, which definitely saw a galvanized effort in the last couple of years, but when you think about this year's theme, talk to me in general what Black History Month means to you, and then we can talk about, is it really making a difference?
Okay, so I'm going to be a bit controversial here, and please, I hope that the D&I police are not in our midst. But sometimes I feel, based on my experience and what I've observed, that Black History Month is a poor attempt to honor Black people. I feel that largely it's an opportunity for education, for reflection, for celebration, but also acknowledge how far we are to go. But I do at times feel that it's a poor attempt to honor Black people. And where am I going with this? So let's rewind to 2020, when a number of events unfolded, galvanized many organizations into coming forward. They did this by, you know, making their logos Black, posting Black squares, rushing to sign up to the Business in the Community Race at Work Charter that's underpinned by like 7 strands of activity. Like one is appointing a race and ethnicity, I think it is sponsor, you know, gathering ethnicity disclosure data, you know, organizations, they publicly declared their race, their ethnicity targets around how they were actually going to increase representation of ethnic minority talent at leadership levels. They did all of that. Okay, so that's 2 years ago. Fast forward to 2022, where ironically, the theme for Black History Month is time for change, actions, not words. What better time to actually showcase your progress and your intentionality and accountability and your delivery against those you know, targets and those metrics and all those things than now? I would love to see organizations on LinkedIn and Twitter talking actually about how they've delivered against the Race at Work Charter. Because if you go onto the business and the community page and you actually Google the Race at Work Charter, you'll see all the signatories. And there's some very well-known established organizations. That's why I'm on a bit of like a rant right now. So it's public. You can see who signed up to it. It's very clear what they need to do. I would love to see organizations talking about how they've delivered against those, but I'm not seeing any evidence of that. I would love to see organizations actually talking about the steps they're taking to ensure they actually achieve the targets they've set for representation of ethnic minority talent by the end of the year. I would love to see organizations where they miss the targets actually demonstrating accountability and then following up and saying, you know what, we publicly declared this and we've missed the target, and this is what we're going to do next year to ensure we're not in a similar position. There's been none of that. And what I'm seeing a lot of right now, and I've observed with a number of organizations, it's like many are no longer treated as a burning platform. There's loads of posts where organizations are showcasing their talent, who are expressing their views, but I'm not seeing much about the organizations in terms of what they are doing to improve the outcomes for Black talent, what they are doing to advance Black talent. They're looking to the Black talent to, you know, shout and, you know, promote Black History Month, but I don't see much intentionality. And for me, when there's a lack of intentionality, it's hard to then ensure there's accountability. And if there's no accountability, then just know the organization has no interest in measuring. If not measuring, there will not be any consequence. And you just got this cycle, but you just can't break.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
You know, so yeah.
I totally hear you. And you know, we've had numerous conversations. It's interesting. I was having this conversation similarly with another DEI lead. And their challenge, shall we say, is, and I guess if we park the theme for the month for a second, I agree that we are definitely having more conversation, so more words. And I think, especially during Black History Month, it does give people the opportunity or the ability to have those difficult conversations, because they are difficult conversations, right? So it gives us a platform to do that. So I get it. I think if we were going to measure progress in that way, you could say there are more conversations happening. Even the fact that we've got the Race at Work Charter, it is progress. I think the focus for me, as you have rightly captioned, is two things. One, I want to see more of a focus on what's more to be done, because we're far away from equity to the table and things like that. And secondly, to your point, I want to see action. And to your point, 2 years later, we're saying action, not words, but we've had a lot of words already. We've had enough, you know, we want to be, and I know there's challenges to that. So there's legal implications of collating ethnicity data. So I hear that. I'm in HR as well. So I totally get that. And it's hard, you know, but I always say it's something that should be part of the culture of an organization. So if you don't have the data, I should still be able to sense that inclusivity and that belonging from an organization. And I don't think we're quite there yet.
Absolutely. But I mean, the thing is, I almost felt like there were some low-hanging fruit opportunities when it comes to how an organization can be more intentional and more accountable, like creating those safe spaces to learn about the Black experience, listening to actually truly understand and educate yourself so that you can take action. You know, on the back of those conversations, being bold enough, like the word that you've used quite a bit today, being bold enough and actually coming forth and declaring like what you're going to do in support of, you know, your Black talent. You stand up initiatives, ensure you build in a feedback loop so that those individuals can actually confirm to you whether or not like that intervention, that initiative actually hit the mark or it didn't. Like for me, I very much see these things as basics. And again, I keep coming back to intentionality. I just feel that if that's missing, you know, institutions, organizations, they run the risk of anything they're trying to do being short-lived. But the thing, and this is something that really grinds my gears, being perceived as performative, and people see through it. And the reality is that organizations cannot expect for the underrepresented individuals to voice their concerns. They feel that something's not working because people are just tired of it. They feel that what they're sharing at times, not all the times, I'm not dismissing all efforts, but at times it's like it's falling on deaf ears. And people are just tired of sharing the feedback. If they're just going to keep quiet, But that is a risk, that actions are seen as performative. And that's really disheartening that we're having that conversation, towards the end of 2022.
Yeah, no, I hear that. But I know, again, from our previous conversations, even though there's that, we've talked about, even as, Black individuals, whilst we feel the weight of it and we don't want to give so that our cup is empty, it's also acknowledging that within our sphere of influence, there is something that we can do, right? So I know that you set up a mentoring program, for example. So just talk me through how you set that up.
Yeah, absolutely. So this started out, I think it was like summer 2020, and I was thinking about a mentoring program and launching this when I was at Standard Chartered, but I was just overwhelmed. And I felt also that like loads of people were trying to do similar. So I just felt that we kind of like underwent this shift where we went from there being like a lack of to actually, there being a saturation of like these initiatives. So I kind of parked things. And I remember I was having a conversation in September 2020 with my accountability partner. And I was just talking about the fact that I had this idea, didn't know how I was going to get it off the ground. And she just wasn't convinced by the fact that I was trying to talk myself out of something which she thought was going to be really great. And she was like, I'm sorry, but I'm not convinced by what you're sharing right now. You can actually launch this, and you can launch it this year. So just get to work. So put the phone down, pull together like this 3-page PowerPoint presentation. The next day I had a one-on-one with my boss. I walked her through it. She was on board. I connected with our community engagement partner, and we launched the program a few months later. So the program was called RISE, and the RISE acronym stands for Reach, Inspire, Support, and Empower. And the premise of the RISE program was to pair senior leaders at Standard Chartered with underrepresented talent in our local community, just to give them insights into the world of work, help them understand a bit more about early careers recruitment cycles, like apprenticeship programs, the recruitment cycles for graduate schemes. They were able to attend insights talks as well, where they learned from a number of senior leaders about, overcoming adversity and how they use certain challenges to like propel themselves to greatness and so forth. So we gave these underrepresented individuals who perhaps wouldn't have access to such things access, and they actually came down to the Standard Chartered offices as well. They met with a number of senior leaders. They attended the graduation ceremony. And I was actually able to get the program to its second cohort before I left. So yeah, I was pleased I was able to do that. And I think my involvement in that program, it highlighted to me the fact that we all have a certain amount of power to be the change that we want to see in the world. And you should never look on yourself as being in too small a role or being too junior to actually be part of the step change that you're trying to create. I at times felt that it had to be HR leaders who were 1 or 2 grades above me who could implement such programs. And there I was, had this idea, put forward the proposal, and everybody just like jumped at it, and we had exec sponsorship and everything. So yeah.
Amazing. And you know what really jumps out at me is, one, that you tried to talk yourself out of it. So again, glad that there was someone there for you to bounce that with, and they could talk you off a ledge. So I think that's quite important, because people will see all of that and think, oh, she woke up one morning and just kind of let it run through, let it run through. But I think to touch on your last point, which is we've all got a sphere of influence. And that's why one of our pillars for Excellerate is around giving back. And I always say to people, if anyone's heard me speak before, regardless of what position you're in, you can mentor someone else. Because I found, even when I was really junior in my career, or even when I was at uni doing an essay, when I was teaching someone or explaining something to someone, I was elevated by that, because I started thinking, girl, you know your stuff. And that happens as well. It's actually reciprocal when you're talking to someone and sharing your advice. It hits home that no matter how junior you are an SME in something, you are aware of stuff. Absolutely. Life is to be lived. So not everything's about work. There's a lot of resilience that I have in my career, which I learned from my personal life. So I think it's important that everyone is aware of that sphere of influence. And I think, as annoying as it can feel in an organization or in your career to be a recipient to everything that's going on, I think sometimes when you give back, it's your own way of holding on to your power over yourself and your feelings. So definitely recommend that to everyone.
Yeah, one thing I would actually say, in a bit of a plug actually for everyone who's on this call, I really encourage all of you to ensure that you do have a mentor. I've tried to ensure that I've had a mentor at every stage of my career. I was even able to secure a mentor at my current company within the first 2 months. It's super important having a mentor on your board of advisors. Just in life, to be honest, somebody who can act as a sounding board, somebody who can help you navigate the organization, become more successful. And I'm talking about mentorship in the context of, work and your career, because I appreciate people do have mentors outside of the work context as well. But I highly recommend it. And also, please don't feel that you're too junior to be deserving of a mentor. I came across my first mentor before I'd actually got my foot through the door in HR. In fact, she was the person who helped me pivot into HR. That was all the way back in 2009. And I still have mentors to today. So yeah, I really encourage you all to try and identify one, because they are invaluable.
Absolutely. And just another plug on a previous event, again, another session that Winnie ran around your board of directors for your career. She does talk a lot about sponsors and mentors and how to capitalize on that. And the final plug is just the power of your peers as well. I know we talk about mentors and we talk about sponsors, but Nikki and I met as peers, and I don't think I know a bigger cheerleader. We've got a group of like-minded individuals, and we gas each other up so much. Like full chest is just the standard in that group. And I think that's really important and not to be underestimated, because your peer knows exactly what you're going through half the time, and they can talk you off a ledge. So just wanted to pin that as well. I want to give everyone an opportunity to ask questions. I've just looked through. I can see Winnie on there saying the D&I police agree with you. So it's good to see that.
I just have to put that out there.
But if anyone has any questions, please pop it into the chat. Whilst we're waiting on that, is there, especially from what we've just been talking about the weight of being Black and, sphere of influence, what's your biggest top nugget for our Black professionals out there? What would you say is the top thing you want them to go away with?
Not to underestimate the power of your network. Because when I actually think about just my career journey today and the trajectory that I'm hoping that I continue on, I've been able to identify some incredible individuals along the way who are either mentors or sponsors or peers or supported me in some advisory capacity that got me one step closer to where I needed to be. You can't do it on your own.
Absolutely.
You are capable, and let's just assume that all things are equal and that you're more than qualified for the next role, but your network is so powerful. But not only your network, your internal network, but also your external network as well. Because when I was actually interviewing earlier this year for the 2 roles, I came to know of them through my network. And there are times when I'm moving from organizations that people are like, oh my gosh, you do a fantastic job of staying in touch with that person. And I'm of the view that actually, if you really like that person and you could genuinely see yourself like grabbing a coffee with them outside of work, maintain that relationship. Just like send them an email maybe every 6 months, just like keep it warm. Yeah. You never know what will come of it. I actually had an old head of HR in the US reach out to me about a role that hadn't even been approved in the organization, say, look, we're trying to build this role out. Would you be interested? And I was just like, wow. So yeah, never underestimate the power of your network. You'll be surprised as to the extent to which your network will be key for your career advancement.
Absolutely. I absolutely agree. And I think to your point, I know you talked about all of your roles and the external piece of it. I also think when dealing with networks and keeping in touch with people, my mantra is never let the time you knock on their door be the time when you're asking for a favor. And that has served me well a lot of the time. When you start a new job, when you move from an organization, don't kind of cut people off. And then when you need them, it's like, oh, hey, long time. Can you do me a favor? That's not great. So to Nika's point, even if it's every 6 months, just checking in, how's things going? I'm quite nosy naturally, so that helps me because I just want to know what's going on. That kind of, and you know, I love to keep in touch. But there's also that strategic piece at the back of my head, which is I want to be able to say, hey, I know someone here, but that not be the first time I'm knocking on their door. So that's definitely a good plug. We've got a couple of questions in the chat. So, Nika, you've demonstrated so much resilience in your career. What advice do you have for dealing with setbacks in your career?
Oh, so I would say, like, use every setback that you experience as an opportunity to undertake some evaluation, because I feel that sometimes in the heat of the moment, there can be a tendency for you to play victim and think that actually you weren't at fault. And sometimes we are our own worst enemies. We are our own biggest blockers. So I think it's definitely an opportunity to undertake reflection. But I also think as well that it's an opportunity to turn that test into a testimony, because the reality is that there are some people, unfortunately, have very questionable motives. And sometimes how you've been treated isn't about you. It's about something that you will never be privy to. You've actually got to be at peace with that as well. Like, I've been in situations where I've had to accept the apology I never received. Imagine that. Imagine if you're waiting for closure. That apology is never going to come. I accept the apology I never received, and I kept it moving. So that's one thing that I would say, like, definitely take the setbacks as an opportunity to undertake like deep reflection, to evaluate the situation, recognize actually that you have a part to play to a certain extent in situations. It may even be that you did something, but maybe how you reacted, something, right? But you have a part to play. So be mindful of that. Use the setbacks, you know, these tests, and turn them into testimonies. But one other thing I would say as well, this is something that's definitely enabled me to make moves with peace in the last 5 years in particular. Be very clear on your deal breakers when it comes to a role that you do, because that will enable you to quickly remove the emotion from the decision-making process as quickly as possible and ensure that you're making it based on logic. And a prime example of where I did this is when I had to make the decision. I say had to because I didn't want to. I had to make a decision to leave the US. I wanted to be out there indefinitely and get a green card and live happily ever after in America. Like, when I told my friends I was moving back, they were like, why? You're thriving. Like, it seems like this is like the makings of version 2.0 of yourself. But I looked at my deal breakers and the scale was tipped in the wrong direction and I couldn't establish equilibrium. So I had to get back to the UK. I did sob, but I didn't allow the emotional side of me to be the reason why I chose to stay in a situation that was no longer serving me.
I love that. The one thing, actually, the next question actually alludes to that. The one thing I wanted to add to your first point is rejection is 9 times out of 10 redirection. So I love that after the sobbing, because there's a space for you to sob, because we all want, but it's to keep that to a minimum and use that as a reflection. And hindsight is 2020. You then realize it had to happen in that certain way, but it's a great opportunity to reflect and, to your point, look through your deal breakers and keep it moving. So I think it's important to focus on that. But the next question talks about the latter part of your statement. So question is, you talked about being clear about your career goals to your leaders. So in addition to your deal breakers, you're also quite vocal with senior leaders about what your next step is or what you're looking for. Do you have any advice for having effective conversations about aspirations? So I know that's a very touchy, uncomfortable topic for some people.
Yeah.
Right? How do you say to your boss, I want your job? Yeah, any tips on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So a few things I would start off by saying is that, firstly, like, whilst your career journey is probably a burning platform, a top priority for you, it's one of maybe hundreds for your boss. So always bear that in mind. The second thing I would say is that, and I've realized this along the way, is that there are many leaders, and I'm going to take a step back. I've worked for some fantastic leaders and I've worked for some questionable leaders. There are some leaders who aren't natural leaders.
Mm.
They landed in these leadership roles because as individual contributors who didn't have responsibility for anybody, they were amazing. And then came a point where we actually decided that we needed to move some people under them to basically beef up their role. And that's why they're a leader. So you also have to recognize that there are some leaders who aren't the greatest at leadership.
Mm-hmm.
Therefore, you can't assume that the baseline that you're starting with when you're approaching these career conversations is the right one.
Yeah.
I'm not saying undermine your manager or question their capability, but don't make assumptions, I guess is my point. So that's where the point about being clear comes in. You need to be crystal clear. You need to communicate and ensure that person has also understood what you have communicated.
Yeah.
But then also going one step further, be bold enough to ask for what is required in their eyes of you to get to the next level. Because what's important is that you then build a roadmap that ensures that you're both singing from the same hymn sheet, that there's clarity and that there's no ambiguity. And ensure that that roadmap also includes timelines. And even if they can't give you an exact timeline, ask them for an estimate, because guess what? We can't wander. It's important that you strike that very delicate balance. I think this applies across all dimensions of life, between being patient and wasting your time.
Word.
Strike a balance between being patient and wasting your time.
Absolutely.
And that roadmap will ensure that you're not wasting your time. And I've been in situations where I've set timelines I've never communicated. And when that timeline wasn't achieved, I was like, I'm out. And I wasn't going to accept anything else, because I'm like, I've set the timeline, I'm honoring it. It's my trajectory that I must honor. I will not betray myself. I'm not expecting you to treat me favorably. Or, allow me to advance in a manner that will have people question how I even got there. But what I will do is I will clearly communicate what my expectations are. I will ask you certain questions to ensure that we're aligned. I'm going to uphold my end of the bargain. And if I feel that you're not going to, or that you're not prioritizing me, I will take the lack of clarity from you in whatever form it is as a no, and I will keep it moving on that basis. And I will also ensure that you understand it's not personal. It's business, because it's business, it's my business, and never be afraid to do that as well. Going back to my point about when you identify with being, part of an underrepresented group, I think sometimes we are heavily conditioned to believe in that we're problematic for asking for more, when there's somebody who's part of another group who has no problem doing that, and they ask more, they're getting more. Yeah,
absolutely. I totally agree. And on the piece about line managers, when we talk about your board of directors, your manager is just one piece of that pie. So don't put all the power of your career into one person's hands. I'm conscious of time, and one question has just come through. So I will run 30 seconds over, I'll quickly go through and then we'll rush through. Someone's asking, can you please provide some useful tips on how to implement Black History Month initiatives in organization where it seems like they don't care about it or haven't taken the steps to recognize it? You're the only Black person in the organization.
So I think
like more than a 30-second question.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things I would say, and I've definitely taken this away based on my experience with sitting on D&I councils. I think the first thing you should do before you even attempt to stand up any intervention, implement anything, is understand the maturity level of the organization. You can't have a big disparity where an organization thinks that they are, let's say you have a 5-point scale, 5 being super mature, advanced, mastery, and your organization thinks they're a 5 and actually in reality they're a 1, and you're trying to then stand up initiatives that are in line with an organization that's a 5. I think the foundation work needs to occur. You need to understand the maturity level of the organization, where they actually are. And then I think it's important that you then seek to align any, celebrations, any interventions, any initiatives to that maturity level, because unfortunately, if you don't, those things run the risk of falling flat, unfortunately, being very short-lived. So yeah, it's really important to have that conversation. How you have that conversation probably run for another session altogether, because you'll be surprised as to the extent to which a group of senior leaders think they're doing an incredible job. Some are, and some are actually patting themselves on the back for an okay job. which is why certain things are very short-lived and don't have the impact that one would want them to have. But I think understanding the maturity level of the organization that you're trying to support, stand these initiatives up for, and then ensuring that you're not being too ambitious with what you're trying to stand up so that, you know, things are realistic.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Nika. Thank you for your time. It's been amazing. I could go another couple of hours, but I know everyone's got stuff to do. Thank you, everyone, for joining. It's been absolutely amazing. Look out for our newsletter. We've already got an event planned for next month. We'll have a speaker from Ariva, who's our corporate partner, and we've talked a little bit more about an organization that's taken action, thankfully, because they're partnering with us. So taking action from a Black History Month perspective, but really excited. Thank you, everyone, for joining, and see you next month. Thank you.
Bye.